how serious is this for Twitter?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me. It's serious in a few ways and perhaps not so serious in others. Clearly, on the first side, very much public perception. This is very visible. It's certainly not the first time that this has happened. We had the Saudi Arabia incident earlier this year. And a few years back, there was actually a contractor that deleted Trump's account for a little bit. So it's not the first time, much more visible, many more names involved, feels much more coordinated. But from a stock perspective and a company perspective, I fully expect Twitter will make the necessary changes to adapt. I expect users will stick around, and perhaps some of the higher profile names may think twice about, using the platform and what they communicate. But overall, I don't think this is similar to the Kylie Jenner moment that Snapchat had a few years ago when she announced she was leaving the platform and the stock kind of tanked accordingly. So I think overall it's pretty moderate, clearly very visible, but I think if you really follow through on the fundamentals, it's something that I believe is very solvable.
You do. All right. But the idea of high-profile users having second thoughts about using the platform would not seem to be an insignificant concern.
No, I think it's very fair. Do I think that they'll continue to use it? I do. I think it's going to take some time. You need to regain trust. This is very much top of mind. I think the way Twitter's typically, and this is, a reflection on tech in general, is very altruistic. You solve for, the optimal use cases, and you don't necessarily consider all the scenarios that bad actors can manipulate and use the platform. But we've seen others come out of it on the other side just fine once they do figure it out and regain that trust. So I do think right now it's very, top of mind, coverage, a lot of attention. But this may be something similar to, the advertising boycotts that we talked about for Facebook, which is barely discussed anymore. So.
Yeah, Mark, you just rattled off a number of different examples of hacks or attacks or incidences that have happened at Twitter in the last couple of years. So when I hear you talk about it being solvable, I wonder why maybe security hasn't been beefed up more ahead of this moment in time. And I also wonder whether other major social media platforms could be susceptible to something similar.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I think for me, it was very disappointing to see that, something like this was still able to occur. And, especially given the previous incidents, you would hope that there would be the urgency and attention to it to be a little bit more proactive in that front. Right now, I fully expect that all social platforms are being very proactive, looking for internal vulnerabilities on their own platforms as well.
You mentioned that you don't expect a lot of user erosion, but how about advertiser erosion?
Yeah, Twitter's already in a unique moment in time where many advertisers are, pulled off the platform. They're very closely tied to events, very much brand-based advertisers that have already, stipulated a lot of conditions around adjacencies, which essentially just means, they don't want to appear next to content that may include, COVID, et cetera. And so I think those effects will persist. I don't know if any advertiser will look incrementally closer at this and say, is this a place I want to advertise if the events do come back? There is some potential. Clearly, we saw it with the ad boycott on Facebook. There was some that also, included Twitter in the group. And if you expand this, not just looking at kind of data security, but the overall, almost as an investor in an ESG matrix, you look at it and say, what are they doing around content moderation, platform toxicity, data security? And is that a place I want to advertise? Certainly, that's up for debate as we go through the rest of the year. If it's a place they'll want to come back to, even as the events and sports comes back.
Hey, Mark, it's not the first time people have looked at Twitter and noticed that it's buggy occasionally. There was the problem with the ad product a few years ago. Obviously, it's resurfacing questions about Dorsey splitting his time. Do you think there is a pattern of either lack of attention from the chief executive or lack of requisite spending to make sure these things don't happen?
Yeah, I can't comment on executive attention, but, there certainly is a history of moving a touch slow on some of these issues. Clearly for the last couple of years, we know that health of the platform has been top of mind. But I don't think anyone could look at Twitter today and say it's they've solved all the health problems on the platform. And it could very well be a very expensive, issue to solve. For example, Facebook has more content moderators than Twitter has employees. And that's just looking at content moderation. Now you get into security, changing admin protocols and rights. And you could certainly expect an increase in at least some expenses to comply and to try to get ahead or at least catch up on this. But, absolutely right. I think historically there has been that pattern of perhaps just moving a touch slowly to address some of these issues.